The Human Exchange student, the Galactic Academy, buzzed with excitement as news spread through the corridors like wildfire. A human was coming. After decades of isolation, Earth had finally agreed to send one of their species to study among the stars. The Academy's crystal spires gleamed under the twin suns of Nexus Prime, as students from dozens of worlds gathered to catch their first glimpse of the legendary Death World species, Commander Zephyr, a towering Krathen with scales that shifted from deep purple to silver depending on his mood, stood at the observation deck watching the approaching transport vessel. His massive frame cast shadows across the polished floor as other faculty members joined him. The humans had been myths until recently, stories told of a species so violent they had nearly destroyed their own planet multiple times, yet somehow survived and thrived. "Do you really think they're as dangerous as the reports suggest?" asked Professor Yolka, her 6 arms nervously adjusting her teaching robes. The Etherean's translucent skin showed the rapid pulse of her dual hearts. Zephyr's scales darkened to a deep indigo. "The military assessments are clear. Humans are classified as an apex predator species. Their homeworld has gravity nearly twice our standard, an atmosphere that would kill most of us, and weather patterns that could level cities. Yet they not only survived but dominated their entire planet." The transport ship landed with a gentle hiss of hydraulics. Through the reinforced viewing ports, they could see the docking bay crews maintaining a respectful distance. Even the maintenance drones seemed to move more cautiously than usual when the airlock finally opened. A collective gasp echoed through the observation deck. Instead of the towering, heavily muscled warrior they expected, a small figure stepped out. The human was barely 5.5 feet tall, with shoulder-length brown hair tied back in what their cultural database identified as a ponytail. Her frame looked delicate compared to the robust builds of most Academy students. That's the human?" whispered Cadet Threx, a young Gorlian whose species averaged 8 feet in height. His confusion was evident in the way his tentacles writhed nervously. The human wore simple clothing, dark pants and a fitted jacket in what appeared to be a military style, though without any visible armor or weapons. Her most striking feature was her eyes, a bright green that seemed to take in everything around her with intense curiosity rather than the cold calculation they'd expected from a predator species. Dr. Melissa Chun adjusted her bag on her shoulder and took her first deep breath of alien air. The atmosphere had been carefully adjusted to match Earth's composition, but it still carried the sense of strange metals and exotic vegetation from the Academy's hydroponic gardens. She'd dreamed of this moment since childhood, never imagining she'd be the first human to walk these halls. As she made her way through the docking bay, she noticed how the other species seemed to shrink away from her. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as she passed. Even the towering Krathen security guards, easily twice her size, watched her with what looked like nervous respect. "Dr. Chun?" a melodious voice called out. She turned to see a graceful figure approaching, tall, slender, with pale blue skin and large, dark eyes. The being moved with fluid elegance, each step perfectly balanced. "I'm Professor Valana of the Celestial Studies Department. I'll be your academic advisor during your stay with us." The professor's English was flawless, though she spoke slowly and carefully, as if afraid of saying something wrong. Melissa smiled warmly and extended her hand in greeting. She noticed how Valana hesitated before carefully taking it, her grip light and brief. "It's wonderful to meet you, Professor. I've read your papers on stellar engineering. Your work on controlled star formation is brilliant." The compliment seemed to catch Valana off guard. Her large eyes widened slightly. "You've, read my research?" "Of course. I've been preparing for this exchange for 3 years. I've studied everything I could get my hands on about the various species and their scientific achievements." Melissa's enthusiasm was genuine and infectious. As they walked through the Academy's main corridors, Melissa marveled at the architecture. The walls seemed to be grown rather than built, with organic curves that channeled natural light in beautiful patterns. Students from dozens of different species hurried past, but she noticed they all gave her a wide berth. Is there something wrong? Melissa asked, noticing the nervous glances. Have I violated some cultural protocol? Valana's expression was difficult to read. It's not that, Dr. Chun, it's just ... We weren't sure what to expect from a human. Your species has quite a reputation. What kind of reputation? Melissa's voice carried genuine curiosity rather than offense. The reports describe humans as incredibly dangerous. Survivors of countless wars, capable of violence that even our most aggressive species find shocking. Your planet's history is filled with conflicts that would have wiped out most civilizations. Melissa stopped walking, her expression thoughtful. I suppose that's one way to look at it. But we also created art, music, literature. We've spent generations learning to be better than we were. The wars taught us the value of peace. A group of Gorlian students nearby had been obviously eavesdropping. One of them, a young male with intricate tattoos covering his tentacles, spoke up. But the military reports say humans can fight for days without rest, that you feel no pain, that you hunt in packs like savage beasts. The corridor had grown quiet as more students gathered to listen. Melissa looked around at all the eyes focused on her, some fearful, others curious, all wary. We do have high endurance, that's true. And we can push through pain when we need to. But we're not mindless killers. She paused, choosing her words carefully. We're protective. When something threatens what we care about, yes, we can be dangerous. But mostly we're just people trying to learn and grow and make connections with others. An older student, a crystalline being from the Shard Confederation, chimed in with a voice like wind chimes. The Academy's defensive protocols were upgraded specifically for your arrival. The security level is now at orange alert. Melissa's shoulders sagged slightly. She'd known this wouldn't be easy, but facing the reality of being seen as a threat was harder than she'd expected. I understand why you'd be cautious. Our species doesn't have the best reputation. But I'm here to learn, not to fight. I'm a xenobiologist and cultural anthropologist. I study life, I don't end it. Valana watched the exchange with growing interest. The humans' responses were nothing like what the briefings had prepared them for. Instead of aggression or dominance displays, she showed vulnerability, empathy, and a genuine desire for understanding. Perhaps, Valana said gently, we should focus on getting you settled in your quarters. Tomorrow you'll begin your orientation classes. As they continued down the corridor, Melissa couldn't shake the feeling that every step was being analyzed. Every gesture scrutinized for signs of the violence everyone expected from her. She'd come here to build bridges between species, but it seemed she'd have to overcome their fears before she could even begin. First day challenges. Melissa's quarters were spacious but sterile, designed to accommodate multiple species with adjustable atmosphere, gravity, and lighting controls. She'd spent her first night adjusting the settings to feel more like home, but sleep had been elusive. The sounds of the academy were alien humming energy conduits, the whisper of air recyclers, and distant conversations in languages that her translator struggled to interpret. Her first class was Introduction to Galactic Civilizations, taught by Professor Kelton, a massive hegemony officer whose species resembled upright bears covered in metallic fur. The classroom was an amphitheater with seats designed for various body types, and Melissa found herself at the center of attention as she entered. The whispers started immediately. Students pointed and stared, their conversations dying as she passed. She chose a seat in the middle section, trying to appear approachable while not seeming aggressive. The chairs were designed for larger frames, making her feel even smaller than usual. Fascinating, came a voice beside her. She turned to see a reptilian student with gorgeous iridescent scales and bright golden eyes. You're much smaller than the database suggested. Database? Melissa asked, settling into her oversized seat. The military assessment files on humans. They describe your species as physically imposing, with enhanced muscle density and superior reflexes. The reptilian student tilted her head, studying Melissa like a specimen. I'm Sishra, by the way. Biochemistry major. Melissa. And I suppose compared to some humans, I am on the smaller side. But our size doesn't really correlate with our capabilities the way it does for most species. Professor Kelton entered the room, his heavy footsteps echoing off the walls. At nearly 9 feet tall and probably weighing close to 800 pounds, he was an intimidating presence. His small, dark eyes immediately focused on Melissa. "Today we have a special addition to our class," his voice rumbled like distant thunder. "A representative of the species that has caused quite a stir in galactic military circles. Dr. Chun, would you care to introduce yourself?" Melissa stood, feeling incredibly small in the massive amphitheater. "Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Melissa Sheen from Earth. I'm here as part of the first human galactic academic exchange. I specialize in xenobiology and cultural anthropology, and I'm excited to learn about all your different civilizations." A student from the back called out, "Is it true that humans can survive injuries that would kill most species?" "Well," Melissa began carefully, "we do have good natural healing abilities and high pain tolerance. But we're not invulnerable." "The reports say you can function with broken bones," another student pressed. "In emergency situations, adrenaline can help us push through injuries, but it's not comfortable or recommended." Professor Kelton's expression was unreadable. "According to military intelligence, humans have been observed fighting effectively even after sustaining what should have been incapacitating wounds." The classroom grew tense. Melissa felt like she was being interrogated rather than introduced. "We're survivors," she said simply. "When our backs are against the wall, we keep going. But that doesn't mean we enjoy violence or seek it out." "Your planet's history suggests otherwise," Kelton challenged. "Continuous warfare, weapons of mass destruction, environmental devastation. Your species seems to have an unusual relationship with conflict." Melissa took a deep breath. This was exactly what she'd feared. "Yes, we've made mistakes. Terrible ones. But we've also learned from them. The reason I'm here, the reason Earth agreed to this exchange, is because we want to do better. We want to be part of something larger than ourselves." A crystalline student from the collective raised a translucent arm. "But what happens when you disagree with something? When you feel threatened? Do you default to violence?" "We try to talk first," Melissa replied. "But if someone I cared about was in danger, if innocent people were being hurt, She paused, realizing how her next words might sound. "Yes, I would fight to protect them." The admission sent a ripple of nervous energy through the classroom. Several students shifted in their seats, and she could see some moving slightly away from her. Professor Kelton nodded grimly. "There it is. The human response. Even the smallest, most seemingly peaceful among you carries that potential for violence." "Not violence for its own sake," Melissa said firmly. "Protection. There's a difference, is there?" Kelton challenged. "To the recipient of human aggression, does the motivation matter?" Melissa felt her frustration building. "Do none of your species protect their young? Their families? Their friends? Is self-defense completely foreign to you?" "We have security forces, yes. Trained professionals who handle conflicts through established protocols and de-escalation techniques. We don't rely on individual violence." "And that works for you because you live in a stable, peaceful society," Melissa replied. "But what if that system broke down? What if those protocols failed?" The question seemed to make several students uncomfortable. Cishra leaned closer and whispered, "Most of our species evolved past individual aggression thousands of years ago. We find it disturbing." After class, Melissa walked alone through the corridors, her mood darker than when she'd arrived. Students gave her an even wider berth than before, and she could hear fragments of conversation as she passed. "Did you hear what she said about fighting?" The professor was right to press her. "They're all dangerous. I heard the security team is considering additional measures." In her next class, Comparative Anatomy with Dr. Hivla, a spider-like arachnoid with multiple degrees in biological sciences, the situation didn't improve. When discussing human physiology, the professor pulled up holographic displays that made Melissa's species look like monsters. "Note the density of muscle fibers," Dr. Hivla pointed out with one of her 8 arms. The redundant cardiovascular system that allows continued function even after significant blood loss. The enhanced production of stress hormones that can increase strength and speed exponentially. Melissa watched as her classmates studied the displays with a mixture of fascination and fear. The way her anatomy was being presented made her sound like a biological weapon rather than a person. "Dr. Chun," Dr. Hivela continued, "would you mind demonstrating your species' grip strength?" A device was brought forward, something like a sophisticated hand exerciser with digital readouts. Melissa approached cautiously. Aware that every eye in the room was on her dot, she gripped the device and squeezed with moderate effort. The display lit up with numbers that caused several students to gasp. "Remarkable," Dr. Hivela clicked excitedly. "That's nearly 3 times what most species can achieve. And that wasn't even your maximum effort, was it?" "No," Melissa admitted quietly. "Show them," Dr. Hivela encouraged. "Don't hold back." Melissa looked around the room at the faces watching her. Some showed scientific curiosity, but many displayed fear. She realized this was a test, but not the kind she could study for. She gripped the device again and squeezed hard. The numbers climbed rapidly, surpassing the previous measurement by a significant margin. When she released it, the room was silent. That's impossible," whispered a cetacean student whose species was known for their powerful limbs. "How can something so small generate that much force?" "Dense muscle fibers and efficient leverage," Dr. Hivela explained clinically. "Humans are essentially compression engines optimized for survival on a death world." As Melissa left the anatomy lab, she overheard 2 students talking behind her. "I don't care how small she looks. Did you see those numbers? The professors are right to be careful. Imagine if she actually got angry." Melissa's shoulders slumped as she walked toward the cafeteria. Every attempt to show her peaceful intentions seemed to backfire, only reinforcing their fears about human violence. She was beginning to wonder if this exchange had been a mistake. The cafeteria incident, the Academy's main cafeteria, was a marvel of engineering, designed to accommodate the dietary needs of hundreds of different species. Atmospheric zones allowed methane breathers to sit next to oxygen users, while specialized food synthesizers created meals tailored to individual biochemistries. Despite the advanced technology, social boundaries remained as rigid as ever. Melissa stood at the human-compatible food station, watching the synthesizer create something that vaguely resembled a chicken sandwich. The machine had been specially programmed with Earth cuisine data, though the results were often more theoretical than appetizing. Around her, the cafeteria buzzed with conversation in dozens of languages, but wherever she looked, she noticed empty spaces forming in her vicinity. "Mind if I sit here?" she asked a table of Etherian students. They looked up with their large, luminous eyes, then quickly gathered their belongings and moved to another table without a word. The next table. A group of crystalline beings from the collective were engaged in what looked like a complex mathematical discussion, their translucent forms flickering with patterns of light. Melissa approached hopefully. "Excuse me, could I—" Before she could finish the question, they had dissolved their physical forms and reassembled at a table across the room. The message was clear. Melissa finally found an empty table near the observation windows and sat alone, picking at her synthetic sandwich while watching the twin suns of Nexus Prime set behind the Academy spires. The isolation was harder than she'd expected. In all her preparation for this mission, she'd imagined academic debates, cultural exchanges, and the excitement of discovery. She hadn't anticipated being treated like a walking weapon. "Is this seat taken?" Melissa looked up to see Sishra, the reptilian biochemistry student from her morning class. Her scales had shifted to a more subdued blue-green pattern that Melissa's cultural database suggested indicated uncertainty. "Please sit," Melissa said, grateful for any company. "I was beginning to think I'd developed some kind of contagious disease." Sishra's neck frill fluttered in what Melissa recognized as amusement. "In a way, you have. Fear is quite contagious among galactic species. We've had peace for so long that most of us have forgotten how to react to anything that might disrupt it." "I'm not here to disrupt anything," Melissa said, then paused. "Well, maybe some assumptions, but nothing violent." The problem isn't what you intend, Sishra explained, delicately handling her own meal with retractable claws. It's what you represent, potential. Most species here have evolved beyond individual violence. We've created systems, protocols, collective decision-making processes. But humans, you've retained that individual capacity for action. Is that really so terrible? Before Sishra could answer, a commotion erupted from across the cafeteria. A group of Gorlian students had surrounded someone at their table, their tentacles writhing in agitation. Melissa could hear raised voices, though her translator was struggling with the rapid-fire exchange. "What's happening?" Melissa asked. Sishra's scales darkened. "Looks like Dexal is having another episode. He's been under a lot of pressure lately." As they watched, the situation escalated. Dexal, a smaller Gorlian with distinctive red markings, suddenly lashed out with his tentacles. The other students backed away, but one wasn't quick enough. A powerful appendage caught him across the face, sending him sprawling. The cafeteria erupted in chaos. Students screamed and scattered, chairs overturned, and several smaller species dove under tables for protection. Dexal seemed to lose control completely, his tentacles whipping wildly as he overturned tables and sent food flying in all directions. Security alarms began blaring. But Melissa could see it would take time for the Academy's response team to navigate through the panicked crowd. Meanwhile, Dexal's rampage was getting worse. He'd backed a group of fragile-looking crystal beings into a corner, and they were making sounds of pure terror. Melissa stood up. "What are you doing?" Sishra hissed, grabbing her arm with surprising strength. "Someone's going to get seriously hurt," Melissa replied, gently but firmly pulling free. "The security team will handle it." "That's what protocols are for." Melissa looked at the cowering crystal beings, then at the security team still struggling to push through the crowd. "There's no time." She began moving toward the chaos, and immediately every eye that wasn't focused on Dexal turned to her. The running students slowed, then stopped, forming a circle around the developing confrontation. Even Dexal paused his rampage, his compound eyes focusing on the small human approaching him. "Easy, Dexal," Melissa said in a calm, steady voice. "Nobody wants to hurt you. We just want everyone to be safe." The Gorlian's tentacles weaved hypnotically as he studied her. When he spoke, his voice was distorted by stress pheromones. "You're the human. The dangerous one. Stay back." "I'm not going to hurt you," Melissa continued, still moving forward slowly. "But you need to stop this before someone gets seriously injured." "I can't." Dexal's voice cracked. "The pressure, the expectations, everyone watching, judging, waiting for us to fail. It's too much." Melissa understood that feeling all too well. "I know exactly what you mean. Everyone here has been watching me since I arrived, waiting for me to do something violent. The weight of representing your entire species is crushing." Dexal's tentacles slowed their wild movement. "They expect us to be perfect, to follow all the protocols, to never lose control. But sometimes the stress is too much." "Sometimes it is," Melissa agreed. She was close enough now that Dexal could easily reach her with his tentacles, but she kept her posture relaxed and non-threatening. "But this isn't the way to handle it. Look around, you're scaring people who never did anything to hurt you." Dexal's gaze swept across the cafeteria, taking in the frightened faces and overturned furniture. His tentacles began to droop as the reality of what he'd done sank in. "I didn't mean... I just wanted them to stop pressuring me, stop expecting so much." "I understand," Melissa said gently. "But right now, we need to get you some help and make sure everyone's okay. Will you let me walk you to the medical center?" Dexal's compound eyes focused on her with an intensity that made several watching students step back. "Why would you help me?" "Everyone says humans are violent, that you solve problems with aggression." Melissa smiled sadly. "Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is choose not to fight." The cafeteria was dead silent as Dexal slowly extended one tentacle toward Melissa. She took it gently, noting the tremor running through his system. Together, they began walking toward the exit as the security team finally arrived. Commander Zefter pushed through the crowd, his scales shifting rapidly between colors as he assessed the situation. When he saw Melissa leading Thexal peacefully toward the exit, his expression became unreadable. "Dr. Chun," he rumbled. "What exactly happened here?" "Thexal was having a stress response," Melissa explained simply. "He needs medical attention, not punishment." The commander looked around at the destroyed cafeteria, then at the uninjured students. "And you resolved this how?" "I talked to him." The simplicity of the answer seemed to confuse everyone present. Professor Villana appeared at the commander's shoulder, her large eyes fixed on the human with something that might have been wonder. "You could have been seriously injured," Villana said. "Gorlians in full stress response have been known to cause significant damage." Melissa shrugged. "Someone needed help. That seemed more important than my safety." As they reached the medical center, Thexal turned to her. "Thank you. I know what everyone thinks of my species, what they think of yours. But you helped anyway." "We all need help sometimes," Melissa replied. "That's what makes us civilized." As the medical team took over Thexal's care, Melissa found herself surrounded by staring students and faculty. The looks weren't quite the same as before, though. Fear was still there, but now it was mixed with confusion, curiosity, and something else she couldn't quite identify later. As she sat in her quarters writing her daily report to Earth, Melissa reflected on the day's events. She'd come here to learn about alien civilizations, but she was beginning to suspect that they had just as much to learn about humanity. Unexpected revelations. Word of the cafeteria incident spread through the academy faster than light through a wormhole. By the next morning, Melissa found the reactions to her presence had shifted in ways she hadn't expected. Where before she'd encountered fear and avoidance, now she faced intense scrutiny and whispered debates. Her advanced xenobiology class with Dr. Hyvla was packed beyond normal capacity. Students who had never shown interest in life sciences crowded into every available seat, spilling into the aisles. Even faculty members lingered near the doorways, pretending to review data pads while obviously listening. "Today we'll be discussing stress responses across different species," Dr. Hyvla announced, her 8 legs clicking rhythmically against the floor. "And we have a unique opportunity to examine recent practical applications of interspecies psychology." Melissa sank lower in her seat, realizing she was about to become a case study. "Dr. Chun," the professor continued, "yesterday you successfully de-escalated a potentially violent situation, using methods that don't appear in any of our standard protocols. Could you explain your approach?" The room fell silent, hundreds of eyes focused on her. Melissa stood slowly, still getting used to being the center of attention in every class. "I recognize the signs of a panic attack," she said simply. Thexal wasn't being violent by choice, he was overwhelmed. "My species deals with similar stress responses, so I use techniques that work for humans." But you approached an agitated Gorlian directly," interjected Cadet Morden, a crystalline being whose faceted surface reflected light in nervous patterns. "All our training says to maintain distance and wait for security protocols." "Sometimes protocols aren't fast enough," Melissa replied. "And sometimes what someone needs isn't protocol, it's understanding." Dr. Hyvla's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "Interesting. Human psychology includes immediate personal intervention in crisis situations rather than systematic responses." "We do have systems," Melissa clarified. "But we also understand that sometimes individuals need to act quickly to prevent greater harm." A new voice spoke up from the back of the room. "What if you had miscalculated? What if your approach had made him more violent?" Melissa turned to see Professor Kelton, the massive hegemony officer from her galactic civilizations class. His presence in the biology lecture was clearly not coincidental. "Then I would have dealt with the consequences," Melissa said. "But doing nothing wasn't an option when innocent people were at risk, even if it meant violence?" Kelton pressed. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Melissa felt the weight of every gaze in the room as she considered her answer. "If absolutely necessary, yes. But violence would have been my last resort, not my first. The goal was to protect people, not hurt anyone." Professor Villana entered the classroom at that moment, her graceful form cutting through the tension. I apologize for the interruption, Dr. Hivla, but I need to speak with Dr. Chun. Academy administration has requested her presence. As they walked through the corridors toward the administrative center, Valana's usual serene composure seemed strained. Is there a problem? Melissa asked. That depends on how you look at it, Valana replied cryptically. The Galactic Council has been monitoring your progress here through our daily reports. Yesterday's incident has generated significant interest. They entered a conference room dominated by a massive holographic display showing representatives from across the galaxy. Melissa recognized some of the species from her studies, but others were completely alien. At the head of the virtual table sat Council Prime Zarthal, an ancient Etherian whose translucent form seemed to shimmer with inner light. Dr. Chun, the Prime's voice carried harmonics that made the air itself seem to vibrate. We have been observing your time at the Academy with great interest. Your actions yesterday raise important questions about human nature that we must address. Commander Zefter materialized beside the display, his scales a neutral gray. Some council members believe yesterday's events prove that humans are too unpredictable for galactic integration. Others see it as evidence of positive traits. What do you think? Melissa asked, looking directly at the Prime. That is what we hope to determine. We're implementing an accelerated evaluation protocol. You'll be placed in various scenarios designed to test human responses under pressure. Melissa felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of scenarios? Nothing harmful, Valana assured her quickly. But situations that will help us understand how humans actually behave rather than how our theories predict they should behave. The first test came that afternoon. Melissa found herself in a simulation chamber designed to replicate various crisis scenarios. The initial setup seemed simple enough. She was placed in a mock research station with several holographic alien researchers when a system failure triggered emergency protocols. The holograms immediately began following strict evacuation procedures, forming orderly lines and checking off items on digital checklists. Meanwhile, alarms blared warnings about catastrophic containment, failure that would affect the entire facility within minutes. Melissa watched the methodical evacuation process for exactly 30 seconds before grabbing an emergency toolkit and heading toward the containment area. Dr. Chun, called one of the holographic researchers. Protocol requires all personnel to evacuate immediately. Protocol is going to get everyone in this facility killed, Melissa called back, already working on the containment unit. This will take 2 minutes to fix if I bypass the safety interlocks. Bypassing safety protocols is strictly forbidden. Melissa paused in her work, looking back at the holographic aliens who were still forming perfect evacuation lines while their facility faced imminent disaster. Sometimes you have to break small rules to prevent big catastrophes. She went back to work, her fingers flying over the alien control systems. Within 90 seconds, she'd stabilized the containment field and reset the emergency systems. The simulation ended with the facility saved, though several holographic officials were filing formal complaints about protocol violations. In the observation room, the Academy's senior staff watched the replay with fascination. She prioritized results over procedure, Dr. Hivla noted, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the data streams. Most species would have followed evacuation protocols even if it meant greater casualties. It's that individual initiative we discussed, Professor Valana mused. Humans seem capable of real-time ethical calculations that override established systems. Commander Zefter's scales shifted to deep purple. The question is whether that's beneficial or dangerous in a galactic society built on collective protocols. The second test was more subtle. Melissa was assigned to a group research project with students from 6 different species, tasked with developing a theoretical solution to interspecies resource conflicts. The other students immediately began forming committees and subcommittees, establishing formal communication channels and voting procedures. 3 hours into what was supposed to be a 4-hour project, They had created an elaborate organizational structure but had barely begun addressing the actual problem. Okay, Melissa said, standing up from the conference table. What if we try a different approach? She walked to the presentation board and began sketching out a simple diagram. The core issue is that each species has different resource needs, but we're all competing for the same space. What if instead of dividing resources, we focused on resource transformation? Within 20 minutes, she'd outlined a framework that addressed the fundamental problem. The other students stared at the board in amazement. How did you develop this so quickly? Asked Shender, an insectoid student whose species was known for their analytical abilities. I started with the end goal and worked backward, Melissa explained. Instead of building process, I focused on solutions. But without proper process, how can we ensure the solution is valid? Protested another student. We test it, Melissa said simply. If it works, it's valid. If it doesn't, we fix it. The concept seemed to mystify her classmates. But when they presented their solution to the evaluation panel, it received the highest marks in the project's history. That evening, Melissa found herself summoned to another council session. This time, the holographic representatives seemed more animated, their various forms flickering with what she'd learned to recognize as excitement or agitation. Dr. Chun, Council Prime Zarthel began, your test results are unlike anything in our databases. You consistently prioritize practical outcomes over established procedures, individual action over collective consensus, and rapid adaptation over careful planning. Is that bad? Melissa asked. It's revolutionary, the Prime replied. For millennia, galactic civilization has been built on the principle that collective wisdom and established protocols prevent conflict and ensure stability. But your approaches suggest there might be value in controlled disruption of those systems. Commander Zefter materialized again, his expression unreadable. Some council members are concerned that introducing human thinking into galactic society could destabilize everything we've built. Others, added a new voice, a flowing, energy-based being Melissa didn't recognize, believe that such stability has made us stagnant. The real test begins 3 weeks after her arrival. Melissa had settled into an uneasy routine at the academy. Students no longer fled when she approached, though many still watched her with a mixture of fascination and wariness. Her classes had become informal laboratories for studying human behavior, with professors regularly asking her to explain her thought processes and decision-making, methods she was reviewing, stellar cartography data in the academies. Main library went emergency. Alarms began blaring throughout the facility. This wasn't the controlled chime of a drill or test. These were the harsh, urgent warnings of a real crisis. Students around her looked up from their studies with confusion rather than concern. In their peaceful corner of the galaxy, actual emergencies were so rare that many had never heard these particular alarms before. Professor, Valana's voice echoed through the communication system, though her usual calm had been replaced by barely controlled tension. All students and faculty report to emergency stations immediately. This is not a drill. Academy security protocols are now in effect. As students began filing toward designated shelter areas with typical galactic orderliness, Melissa noticed something that made her blood run cold. Through the library's massive observation windows, she could see ships approaching the academy, sleek, predatory vessels that definitely weren't part of the regular traffic. Those aren't academy ships, she said to Sushra, who had appeared beside her. The reptilian student's scales had shifted to deep brown, indicating extreme stress. Those are Ravager designs, pirates, but that's impossible. This sector has been secure for centuries. Apparently not anymore, Melissa replied, watching as the approaching ships took aggressive formations around the academy. We need to get to the emergency stations. They joined the stream of students moving through the corridors, but Melissa quickly realized the academy's emergency protocols had a fatal flaw. They were designed for system failures or natural disasters, not hostile action. Students were being directed to central gathering points that would be perfect targets for anyone wanting to take hostages. When they reached the main assembly hall, Melissa's fears were confirmed. Hundreds of students and faculty had been herded into a space with limited exits and no defensive capabilities. Through the hall's transparent aluminum walls, they could see armed figures in powered armor beginning to breach the academy's outer hull. "This is all wrong," Melissa muttered, earning confused looks from nearby students. "What do you mean?" asked Cadet Threx, the young Gorlian who had questioned her on the first day. "We're following standard emergency procedures." "Standard procedures for accidents, not attacks," Melissa replied, scanning the room for alternative exits and defensive positions. "You've turned yourselves into one giant target." Commander Zefter's massive form pushed through the crowd toward them, his scales cycling rapidly through stress colors. "Dr. Chun, given your species' expertise in conflict situations, do you have recommendations for our current predicament?" The question drew attention from everyone within earshot. Melissa found herself the focus of hundreds of eyes, all looking to her for answers their own protocols couldn't provide. "First, we need to split up," she said, raising her voice to address the growing crowd around her. "Large groups are vulnerable. Second, we need to control access points and create fallback positions." "That goes against every safety protocol we have," protested Dr. Hivela, her 8 legs skittering nervously. "Concentration allows for better protection and easier rescue operations. From natural disasters, yes. From attackers, no. They'll either capture everyone at once or have multiple targets to divide their attention." A massive impact shuddered through the academy as the pirates breached the main hull. Emergency lighting cast eerie red shadows across the assembly hall as the facility's defensive systems came online. "We don't have training for this kind of situation," Commander Zefter admitted. "Our security forces are equipped for civil disturbances and accidents, not military action." Melissa looked around at the faces surrounding her: scientists, engineers, researchers, and students from dozens of worlds. None of them were warriors, but all of them were intelligent beings capable of learning. "Then we make it up as we go," she said. "Commander, can you access the Academy's internal systems from here?" "Yes, but I need layout schematics, population distribution, and whatever intelligence we have on the attackers." Within minutes, holographic displays filled the air above them, showing the Academy's complex structure and the locations of the invading forces. Melissa studied the data with an intensity that made several students step back nervously. "They're moving methodically through the residential sections," she observed, looking for something specific, not just causing random destruction. "The research archives," Professor Villana said suddenly. "The Academy houses some of the most advanced technological research in the galaxy. If pirates could steal that data, they'd have access to military-grade technology, advanced manufacturing techniques, maybe even weapons research," Melissa finished. "Okay, that gives us an advantage." "How is that an advantage?" Cishra asked, her scales now a pale, frightened yellow. "Because they need the archives intact. They can't just blow everything up and sort through the wreckage. They need to be careful, which means they're constrained in how much force they can use." Melissa turned to address the assembly hall. "I need volunteers. People willing to move through the academy and help evacuate anyone still trapped in the residential areas. Small groups, stay mobile, avoid confrontation." That's incredibly dangerous," Commander Zefter protested. "Academy policy is to maintain defensive positions until rescue arrives." "Rescue from where?" Melissa asked bluntly. "Your distress signals are being jammed, and by the time anyone realizes there's a problem here, this will be over. We're on our own." The reality of their situation began to sink in across the assembly. These weren't people accustomed to being truly threatened, and the concept of self-reliance in crisis was foreign to their collective-based societies. To Melissa's surprise, the first volunteer was Thexal, the Gorlian student from the cafeteria incident. "I'll help," he said quietly. "You helped me when I was out of control. Now I want to help others." More volunteers stepped forward: Cishra, several advanced students, and even some faculty members. Within minutes, Melissa had organized them into search and rescue teams with specific routes and fallback positions. "Remember," she addressed the volunteers, "your job is to help people, not fight pirates. If you encounter the attackers, evade and retreat. Let them know you're not a threat, but don't let them capture you." As the teams dispersed through the Academy's service corridors, Melissa found herself leading a group toward the research levels. Their route took them through sections of the Academy few students ever saw, maintenance areas, environmental systems, and emergency infrastructure. "How do you know about these passages?" whispered Cadet Morden, the crystalline being who had questioned her approach in the cafeteria incident. "I studied the Academy's complete schematics before arriving," Melissa replied, pausing to check a junction ahead. "On Earth, we have a saying, 'Proper preparation prevents poor performance.'" They moved carefully through the maintenance levels, occasionally hearing the sound of the pirate search operations echoing through the Academy's structure. Each time they encountered trapped students or faculty, Melissa's team efficiently guided them to safer areas using routes the attackers hadn't discovered, but as they approached the main research archives, it became clear their luck was running out. The pirates had established a strong presence in the area, with armed guards at every major access point. Through ventilation grates, Melissa could see figures in advanced combat armor systematically downloading data from the Academy's most secure systems. "There's no way past them," Cishra whispered. "They've got every entrance covered." Melissa studied the tactical situation, her mind racing through possibilities. In her peripheral vision, she noticed her teammates watching her with an expression she was beginning to recognize. They were waiting for her to have a plan. "The archives have independent life support systems," she said finally. "If we can access the environmental controls... You want to cut off their air supply?" Morden's crystalline form flickered with alarm. "Not cut it off. Modify it. The Academy's emergency systems include non-lethal pacification gases for riot control. If we can reroute those into the archive areas..." "That could work," admitted Threxo. "But someone would have to reach the main environmental control center, and that's right next to where they've set up their command post." Melissa looked at her small team of volunteers, scientists, and students who had never imagined they'd be planning tactical operations against armed pirates. But they were here, they were willing, and they were trusting her to find a way. "Then we better get creative," she said. When plans collide, getting to the Environmental Control Center required moving through sections of the Academy that were crawling with pirates. Melissa's makeshift team had made good progress using maintenance shafts and emergency passages. But the final approach would require crossing open corridors under the enemy's nose. "I still think this is insane," whispered Cishra for the third time as they huddled in a utility closet 2 levels above the control center. Her scales had taken on stress patterns that reminded Melissa of zebra stripes. "Insane plans are often the ones that work," Melissa replied quietly, checking the tablet they'd liberated from an abandoned security station. "Rational enemies prepare for rational responses." Through the closet's ventilation grate, they could hear the heavy footsteps of armored pirates patrolling the corridor. The sound was rhythmic, methodical. These weren't random raiders, but disciplined military forces. "There," Vexal pointed with one tentacle at the tablet display. "They've established a patrol pattern. 12-minute cycles, 3-person teams." Melissa studied the timing. "That gives us a 4-minute window every cycle when this section is clear. Enough time to reach the control room if we move fast." Cadet Morden's crystalline form flickered nervously. "What if the control room is guarded?" "Then we improvise," Melissa said simply. When the next patrol passed, Melissa led her team out of the utility closet and down the corridor toward their target. The Academy's emergency lighting cast long, eerie shadows that helped conceal their movement. But every step seemed to echo despite their attempts at stealth. The Environmental Control Center was surprisingly unguarded, the pirates had apparently considered it low priority compared to the research archives and communication systems. Melissa was beginning to suspect that whoever was leading this operation was extremely competent but had made the classic mistake of underestimating the opposition. "Okay," she whispered, as they slipped inside the control room. "Sishra, you're our biochemist. Can you identify the right gas mixture to use?" The reptilian student's claws danced over the control interface as she accessed the Academy's emergency systems. "The pacification compound should be effective against most species, but it won't work on everyone. Some of the pirates might have biological filters or immunity boosters." "We don't need to stop all of them," Melissa replied, studying the facility's schematics. "Just enough to create confusion and give the other teams a chance to secure the archive data." Vexal was monitoring the corridor through a security camera feed. "Patrol coming back early. We've got maybe 90 seconds. Melissa's hands flew over the environmental controls, rerouting gas lines and overriding safety protocols. The system fought her at every step. It had been designed to prevent exactly the kind of modification she was attempting. "There's another problem," Morden reported from his position at a secondary control panel. "The archive sections have independent air filtration systems. The gas won't affect anyone inside the secured areas." "Then we have to get them to come out," Melissa said, finishing her modifications and initiating the gas release sequence. "How long until the patrol reaches this level?" 30 seconds? Vexal replied tensely. Melissa made a decision that would have horrified every military strategist on Earth. Instead of hiding or attempting to evade the patrol, she walked to the control room's main door and opened it. "What are you doing?" Sishra hissed. "Creating a distraction," Melissa replied. Stepping out into the corridor just as 3 heavily armored figures rounded the corner, the pirates stopped, clearly not expecting to encounter a single unarmed human in an area they thought was secure. Their leader, a massive being in powered armor that bore no resemblance to any species Melissa recognized, raised a weapon that looked capable of vaporizing small buildings. "Surrender immediately," the figure commanded through a voice modulator that made every word sound like a threat. "I'm Dr. Melissa Chun." "Human exchange student," Melissa said calmly, raising her hands but not backing away. "I'm not armed, and I'm not a threat to your operation. Human?" The leader's helmet turned slightly as if consulting internal displays. "You're not supposed to be here." Intelligence reported this facility was populated entirely by passive species. Intelligence was wrong about a lot of things, Melissa replied. Behind the pirates, she could see the first wisps of pacification gas beginning to drift through the ventilation systems. "Where are the other humans? How many of your kind are at this academy?" "I'm the only one," Melissa said truthfully. "Earth sent me here to learn about your civilizations." The revelation seemed to confuse the pirates. They exchanged glances through their helmets, clearly unsure how to process this information. "Boss," one of them said, "orders were to secure the facility and extract research data. No mention of dealing with humans." "I know what the orders were," the leader snapped. Then to Melissa, "You're going to accompany us to the command post. Our employer will want to question you personally." "Actually," Melissa said, taking a step backward, "I don't think that's going to happen." The leader's weapon swung up to target her. "That wasn't a request." "I know. But you might want to check on your friends in the archive section." Through their communication system, panicked voices began reporting strange malfunctions throughout the facility. Equipment shutdowns, personnel becoming drowsy and disoriented, and security systems behaving erratically. "What did you do?" the leader demanded. "Applied human problem-solving techniques to your tactical situation," Melissa replied, continuing to back away as the pacification gas grew thicker around them. "You see, you made the same mistake everyone else here has made." "What mistake?" The leader's voice was becoming slightly slurred as the gas began affecting his suit's air supply. "You assume that because I'm small and alone. I'm not dangerous." The pirates raised their weapons. But Melissa had already ducked back into the control room where her team was waiting. Vexal immediately sealed the door and activated the room's independent air supply while Sishra monitored the gas dispersal throughout the facility. "It's working," she reported excitedly. I'm reading effectiveness rates of 70 to 80% in the main archive areas. Most of their people are becoming incapacitated. Through the security cameras, they could see chaos spreading through the pirates' operation. Some had managed to seal their armor against the gas, but many others were stumbling around in confusion or had collapsed entirely. Now what? Morden asked. We've disrupted their operation, but we haven't actually stopped them. Melissa was studying the security feeds with intense concentration. Their leader isn't in the archive areas. He's smart enough to stay in sections with independent air supply. And he's probably calling for backup or preparing some kind of contingency plan. As if summoned by her words, explosions echoed through the Academy's structure. Not the controlled detonations of military operations, but the angry, destructive blasts of someone taking revenge for a failed plan. He's destroying what he can't steal, Dexal observed grimly. If they can't have the research data, they're going to make sure nobody else can either. Melissa felt a cold rage building in her chest, not the hot, impulsive anger that her species was known for, but the controlled, purposeful fury that had driven humans to survive on one of the galaxy's most hostile worlds. How many people are still trapped in those sections? She asked. SYSS single quotes. Ra checked her readings. At least 40 students and faculty members who couldn't reach the evacuation points. Then we stop him, Melissa said with quiet certainty. We? Morden's crystalline form flickered with alarm. Melissa, we're researchers, not warriors. We've done more than anyone could have expected already. Those are our people trapped in there, Melissa replied, already moving toward the door. And I didn't come to this academy to watch innocents die while I hid in a control room. Her teammates looked at each other with the complex expressions of beings who had never expected to face such choices. Then, one by one, they began following her toward the door. Okay, Cishra said with a resigned hiss. But if we're going to do something this stupid, we need a plan that's even more insane than the last one. Melissa smiled grimly. I was hoping you'd say that. The first punch lands, the pirate leader had barricaded himself in the Academy's main research laboratory with a dozen hostages and enough explosives to level half the facility. Through security cameras, Melissa could see him pacing back and forth. Like a caged predator, his powered armor scarred from the failed gas attack and his movements sharp with frustrated rage. My name is Warlord Krexen, his amplified voice echoed through the Academy's communication system. I'm going to give you exactly 10 minutes to surrender the human who sabotaged my operation. If she doesn't present herself, I start executing hostages. From their position in an adjacent laboratory, Melissa and her team could see the terrified faces of the captured students and faculty. Among them was Professor Villana, whose normally serene expression showed fear not for herself but for her students. You can't seriously be considering this, Cishra whispered urgently. He'll kill you the moment you show yourself. Maybe, Melissa replied, studying the tactical situation through multiple camera angles. But he'll definitely kill them if I don't. Vexal's tentacles writhed with agitation. There has to be another way, some protocol or procedure we haven't considered. Protocols got us into this mess, Melissa said quietly. Time for something different. She had been observing Krexen's behavior for the past hour, noting patterns that her teammates had missed. The warlord was powerful and well-equipped, but he was also operating alone now that most of his forces had been incapacitated. More importantly, he was angry, and angry beings made mistakes. I'm going in, Melissa announced, checking the makeshift equipment they'd assembled from laboratory supplies. That's suicide, Morden protested, his crystalline form flickering with distress patterns. Even if you could somehow get past his armor, he's 3 times your size and armed with military-grade weapons. Melissa smiled with an expression that made her teammates unconsciously step back. For the first time since arriving at the academy, she looked exactly like what the military reports had described, a predator from a death world. You're thinking like prey, she said simply. Size and weapons only matter if he can use them effectively. Before anyone could stop her, Melissa activated the laboratory's intercom system. Krexen, this is Dr. Melissa Chun. I'll make you a deal. The warlord's laughter boomed through the speakers. The little human wants to negotiate? How amusing, What could you possibly offer me? Single combat, Melissa replied calmly. You and me, no weapons, no armor. If you win, you get your hostages and safe passage off this station. If I win, you surrender and release everyone unharmed. The silence that followed was deafening. Through the security cameras, they could see Crexon's helmet turning as he processed this unexpected challenge. You're insane, he finally said. I'm a trained warrior from a military species. You're a soft academic from a primitive world. Then you should have no problem accepting, Melissa countered. Unless you're afraid that all your armor and weapons are the only things that make you dangerous. The taunt hit exactly where she'd intended. Crexon's species, according to her, cultural database, valued personal combat prowess above almost everything else. Questioning his individual strength was the equivalent of calling him a coward. Fine, he snarled. But when I crush you in front of your friends, I'm going to take my time with the executions. The main laboratory had a large open area designed for equipment demonstrations. Crexon moved the hostages to one side, still threatening them with explosives, while he began removing his powered armor. Underneath the mechanical shell, he was even more imposing, nearly 8 feet tall with 4 arms ending in razor-sharp claws and muscle definition that suggested he could bench press a small vehicle. Melissa's teammates watched in horror through the security cameras as she entered the laboratory. Next to Crexon, she looked like a child challenging a giant. Last chance to run, little human, Crexon taunted, flexing all 4 arms in an impressive display of strength. Melissa didn't respond with words. Instead, she began moving in a way that confused everyone watching, including Crexon. Her stance was low and relaxed, her movements fluid and economical. She looked less like someone preparing for combat and more like someone settling in for a dance. What are you doing? Crexon demanded, clearly unsettled by her calm demeanor. Something my species calls letting the predator make the first move, Melissa replied softly. Crexon charged with a roar that shook the laboratory equipment. 4 clawed arms swept toward Melissa in a coordinated attack that should have shredded anything in its path, but Melissa wasn't there anymore. She had moved with a speed and precision that seemed to defy physics, flowing around Crexon's attack like water around a stone. Before the warlord could adjust, her fist connected with a nerve cluster behind his knee that her xenobiology training had identified as a critical weakness. Crexon stumbled but didn't fall. He spun around with another 4-armed assault, but again Melissa simply wasn't where his attacks landed. This time her counterattack targeted pressure points along his neck, delivered with the precise anatomical knowledge of someone who had spent years studying alien physiology. Impossible, Crexon gasped, backing away. Humans aren't supposed to be that fast. You've been reading the wrong reports, Melissa said, continuing to circle him with that same fluid, predatory grace. We're not just strong, we're endurance hunters. We track our prey until it's exhausted, then we move in for the kill. The pattern continued for several minutes. Crexon would attack with overwhelming force. Melissa would evade with minimal effort, and then she would strike at precisely calculated points designed to weaken rather than injure. Each exchange left the warlord slightly more tired, slightly more frustrated, and slightly less coordinated. Through the security cameras, her teammates watched in amazement as their small, peaceful colleague systematically dismantled a trained warrior twice her size. She's not fighting him, Cishra whispered in awe. She's hunting him. Look at his movements, Bexal observed. He's getting sloppy, desperate. She's making him waste energy while conserving her own. Finally, inevitably, Crexon overextended himself in a wild swing that left him completely off balance. Melissa stepped inside his guard and delivered a precise strike to his solar plexus, a blow that would have been negligible against his armor but was devastating against exposed flesh. Crexon collapsed to his knees, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Melissa stood over him, not breathing hard, not even seeming particularly stressed. It's over, she said quietly. Release the hostages and surrender. The warlord looked up at her with something that might have been respect mixed with fear. How? Your species was supposed to be primitive, barbaric? You fought like a human, Melissa finished. We've been fighting for our survival since before your species developed agriculture. The difference is, we learned to fight smart instead of just fighting hard. As Academy security forces finally arrived to take Crexend into custody, the hostages gathered around Melissa with expressions of awe and gratitude. Professor Villano was among the first to reach her. "Dr. Chun," she said softly, "I believe we owe you an apology. We thought we understood what humans were capable of, but we were looking at all the wrong capabilities." Melissa smiled tiredly. "You were expecting us to be monsters. But the thing about humans is, we're only monstrous when we need to be. Most of the time, we'd rather just talk and learn and make friends." Later, as the Academy began returning to normal and the last of the pirates were taken into custody, Melissa found herself once again standing before the Galactic Council. But this time, the expressions on their various faces were very different. "Dr. Chun," Council Prime Zarthel began, "today's events have given us much to consider about the nature of humanity and its place in galactic civilization. We were wrong to fear your capacity for violence," added another council member. "Instead, we should have been learning from your capacity for restraint." Commander Zefter materialized beside the display, his scales showing patterns Melissa had never seen before. "Your actions today saved lives and protected invaluable research. But more than that, you showed us something we'd lost: the value of individual initiative in service of collective good." "So what happens now?" Melissa asked. "Now," the Prime replied, "we begin the real exchange. Not just humans learning about our civilizations, but our civilizations learning what they can become with a little human influence." As the council session ended and she walked back through the Academy corridors, Melissa noticed that the looks from other students had changed completely. There was still awe in their expressions, but now it was mixed with respect, gratitude, and something that looked very much like friendship. She had come to the Academy to build bridges between humanity and the galaxy. What she hadn't expected was that sometimes you had to throw the first punch to show people you were worth knowing,